Welcome to Transforming and Thriving
with best friends Brooke, Stacie, and Neelia.
Podcast dedicated to women sharing their inspirational stories.
Hey there, everyone. We're so excited to be back. I'm Neelia.
And I'm Stacie. We are absolutely thrilled to be joined by Joree Rose today. Joree is a marriage and family therapist, a mindfulness teacher, a podcaster, and an author who helps people be in better relationships to themselves and others. She guides her clients in helping them identify the patterns that they keep getting stuck in, gain compassionate insight into the roots of those patterns, heal the wounds perpetuating the patterns, and ultimately rewrite their narrative to reflect their highest and authentic self. Joree has helped thousands of women and couples cultivate happiness, alignment, and connection. On a personal note, I actually listened to her podcast, Journey Forward with Joree Rose, years ago when I was going through a divorce. And I found her messages to be extremely valuable and empowering during a very difficult time in my life. So I am so grateful that things are coming full circle, and she is a guest on our podcast sharing her personal story with us here.
Stacie, if you could see my face right now, you'd see a huge smile that I have. It warms my heart when things come full circle. So thank you both so much for having me on. I am really honored to be here.
Thank you so much for being here today. How are you today?
Today, I am really good, actually. I started off my morning with a client session who comes to my house, and we did a little untraditional session in which we pulled 3 different angel card decks, and the whole session was based on what we pulled. And it was one of those aligned moments where everything just felt so spot on. It's given me such energy and made me think I really need to come back to some of those practices, like pulling a card daily and believing that that's the universe's intention for me that day. And what can I take from that? And how can I integrate that? And how can I share that with my work? So, yeah, I'm feeling really energized and aligned this morning.
I love that. And do you mind sharing what is the deck called?
Gosh, that's a great question. I have like 15 different decks in my drawer, and it was more of like listening to my gut to say, pull these. So I don't even know the one that I pulled, but it was so beautiful. And to do that with the client and to bring it into exactly the message she needed to hear. And even my cards that I pulled in relation to how I show up for her as her therapist and her work, the synergy was really, it just felt magical. I think it's a good description into my work because it brings a good amount of spirituality and woo-woo with a combination of very grounding tools in therapy and mindfulness and meditation. So it was a good mix.
Wow. Well, we really appreciate you being here. And I love that you not only were able to help somebody earlier this morning, but you're also able to continue helping others to also our listeners today. And we wanted to share your story and maybe if you had a major transition or life event that you experienced that kind of marked a journey or a before and after in your life.
Yes, I have so many different aspects to my journey. And what feels most potent to share today is I woke up one day in my early 30s and asked myself the question, how did I get here? I don't remember making the conscious choices to get to where I was. And to paint the picture, I, at the time, had been married to my high school sweetheart, who I had been with since I was 13 years old. And we had never broken up. I met him the summer before going into freshman year of high school. Even though we went to separate high schools and separate colleges, we were together the whole time. And I ended up graduating college a year early to catch up to him. And I was at the time operating from a value set of creating safety and security. And while we were like best friends and we had fun together, I had asked myself the question in my early 20s, is this the right relationship for me? Am I here because I want to be, or am I here because I'm afraid not to be? And I had come from a family in which there had been a lot of trauma, and uncertainty was really, really scary for me. And some of that trauma included transgenerational trauma that, I was the recipient of some of that DNA, but also the narratives and the stories of the world's an unsafe place. And so a lot of my fears and anxieties weren't what ifs, they were based in reality of what happened in my family or in my childhood. And what some of those things were was my mom's parents were killed in a car accident when my mom was 16. She was the only survivor of the accident. They were hit head on by a drunk driver, and my mom instantly became caretaker to her two younger brothers, who were 13 and 7 at the time. And her immigrant Russian grandparents moved in, but she really became the caretaker. And that accident not just impacted, obviously, her parents who died at 38 years old, who they had been together since they were 12 years old, but it impacted the ripple effect of generations. And my mom married my dad when she was 19. She had my brother and sister, and I came along many years later. My sister's about 10 and a half years older than me. And my parents got divorced when I was 3. And I never really knew my dad. We lived in the same area for a few years. And then when I was 7, moved from Southern California up to Northern California and only saw him on the weekends. When I was living near him, only saw him maybe every other weekend for a little bit. And then once we moved, it was really just maybe a week or so in the summer and a little bit over winter break. And then when I was 10, my dad committed suicide. So by the time I was 12 years old, I had been to 6 funerals. Death was a familiar experience and topic in my home. I had, my dad's parents had died. There were other family members. And yet I didn't even know how to understand or process all that death and loss, other than it incited a lot of fear and anxiety in me that people can leave at any moment. And my mom, while being an amazing survivor, also didn't realize that she was in the midst of a trauma, and only a few years ago realized, oh my God, I had a traumatic experience. But the impact of that on me, like I said earlier, I was operating from values of safety and security. And I think those were the values that kept me with my boyfriend who became my husband. He was a good person and he took care of me and it felt safe. But I was also missing a lot of what I believed relationships were supposed to have, like depth and vulnerability and growth and connection and intimacy. And I had a really good life, but I wasn't fulfilled. And so I wake up one day in my early 30s with this question of, how did I get here? And I realized I had been going through the motion of what was next, what was next, what was next. And I thought, oh, well, once we get engaged, then I'll be happy or fulfilled. Once I get married, then I'll feel more settled. And then it just, things in succession, from getting married to having my first daughter. I was 25 years old when my daughter was born, and then my second daughter at 28. And now here I am in my early 30s, and I had achieved or gotten to all of those next. And I realized, oh my God, what's next? And that thought really made me pause and kind of spiraled me into what I call my 1/3 life crisis, because I was too young at 31, 32 years old for it to be midlife. And I didn't know what to do with that, because here I had achieved all the things that I thought would be fulfilling for me. And yet, while I was happy and had the exact life that I thought I wanted, something was missing. And what was missing was me, because I had been dependent on my mom growing up, all of that trauma and loss. It was a co-creation that I think she needed me a lot. So she created some dependence on her. I had an enmeshed family system growing up, still enmeshed, that I finally broke free from just about a year and a half ago. 47 years old, I'm beginning to understand boundaries with family of origin in a very actualized way, not a conceptual way. And I didn't know who I was. I used to introduce myself by the things I had been through, but not who I was. And when I realized I had no idea who Joree was outside of being a wife and a mom, I didn't know what to do. So what I did do was I got myself into therapy. And I had already had a master's in counseling psychology with the intention to be a therapist. I had actually started the internship process many years earlier to become a therapist. And in California, you need 3,000 hours to fulfill your obligation before you can be qualified to take the state licensing exam. Well, I did that really young. I was young for my grade. I graduated high school at 17. I finished college in 3 years. So I was 20 years old when I graduated, took only a semester off before graduate school. So here I was practicing to be a therapist at like 22, 23 years old. And while I had been through a lot of trauma, which felt like, oh, I have life experience, I can help others, I realized about halfway through those 3,000 hours, I had no business being anybody's therapist because I hadn't healed from any of the experiences I had gone through. Just because you go through them doesn't mean you've gone through them in a way that is healthy or transformative or healing or a way to break any of the patterns that got me there. So I ended up stopping my hours and quitting, which I had never quit before. And I, stopped that at 24 years old, and then I got pregnant. So here I am now, 31, 32 years old. My daughters are both in school. And I realized I had time to first look at myself that I never had done before. So that first day that I was in therapy, one of the things, aside from realizing I was in the right place, was the acknowledgement that I wanted to go back and finish my hours to become a therapist. And that felt really big because I had been out of it for so long. I lost all the hours that I started, and I was halfway through the 3,000. So I was starting from scratch again.
Oh my
And
gosh.
there was, it was, it was a lot. And I was ready at this time to go through those internship hours and do the personal work in a way that I knew I could, from a place of some greater maturity and greater recognition of what I was needing to do professionally, but also I was in that space of I'm ready to look at myself. So through a series of many serendipitous events, that could be an entire podcast episode alone with you guys on just the synchronicity of when you ask the universe for signs, how it delivers if you're paying
Mm.
attention.
Yep.
I discovered mindfulness practice, and and it was really just a book I saw on my supervisor's bookcase. I didn't know what mindfulness was. A- Again, through another series of amazing synchronistic events, I started Introduction to Mindfulness class the very following week. And I didn't really learn that much because I didn't think the teacher was very good. However, I learned I needed to learn more. And that got me started on long, ongoing journey delving into mindfulness and meditation that became my personal and my professional path. And the overlap of my personal journey also helped me learn the power of vulnerability in a professional setting. And the more I delved in, I went on retreats. I went on a 5-day silent Buddhist meditation retreat where we meditated for like 16 hours a day, which for me was shocking because I don't think I've ever stopped talking my whole life. The fact that I sat in silence for 5 days is still shocking to me that I was able to go through that. But it was also really shocking because my very first mindfulness class, we were guided in a 10-minute meditation, and I literally thought I was going to die from the stillness.
Hmm.
And it made me realize the extent to which I was staying busy and going on what was next, what was next, what was next. So I didn't actually acknowledge what I was feeling. And through this process, many, many awarenesses came to me. One of which was, oh, I'm thinking my feelings. I'm not feeling my feelings. That I had
Ugh.
been conditioned, I think, as a survival mechanism. It was self-protective. It did keep me safe because I didn't have at the time the role models or the community or the friends or the setting to deal with, oh my goodness, like everything that I thought was what I needed or what felt real for where I was at in my life, all of a sudden felt like, who am I? And it was a really jarring and scary, but exhilarating beginning of a journey.
So, I mean, you've been mentioning how all of these transitions and changes that you're going through, doing all this professional work and learning about mindfulness and doing your own therapy and trying to heal and move through all of these experiences that you'd had and discovering yourself again. I'm so curious to hear how that shifted your personal life and relationships, because I'm assuming that it had a huge impact on, you're coming in and entering as this different transforming human
Oh,
into these relationships, and you're saying how your values changed. So I'm so curious to hear more about that.
it was a massive transition. And I have to give credit where credit is due. My husband at the time was really supportive. And I think also he was terrified because I think he began to see like, oh shit, like we're rocking the boat of the foundation that at this point had been present for like 20 years. I mean, we really had grown up together. I didn't have much separate life outside of that. So this was the very first time ever. Because I don't, most people, they individuate when they go off to college. I didn't do that. I was too scared. Even though I went to a separate college from him, I was an hour and a half away, and I drove there every single weekend to see him. Like, I have such an embarrassingly sad college experience. I hardly had any friends. I didn't create any real life for myself. I was so fearful of being alone. And at that time, because that was so much of my mom's fears, I didn't know if that was mine or just what I was conditioned to believe. So, through again, another series of very serendipitous events, I had learned about a book titled The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, written by Dan Millman, who has become very well known for this book. For many people, it's an entree into spirituality. And it was written in the early 80s. And I mean, literally, I was in a tough place in that moment because all of this awakening began me questioning my marriage. And is this actually the right partner for me? And can I get what I need and continue to grow in an environment in which he wasn't inspired or desired growth in the way that I was? And so it felt very disconnecting from just my stability. And that was all an internal experience at that point. And in the midst of that, one of his old fraternity brothers randomly reaches out on Facebook. And we had all been friends in college, and it had been many years since college, at least over 10 years. And he said, "How are you?" And I'm like, "Actually, I'm really kind of struggling right now." And that's all I said. And he said, "Hang in there, peaceful warrior." And I'm like, "Peaceful warrior, what's that?" And he said, "It's a book, check it out." So this guy, Jack, dropped in like this little angel. I hadn't spoken to in over 10 years. That was the entire interaction. And while I was at the time going through mindfulness-based stress reduction coursework and training with Jon Kabat-Zinn, who's like the head of mindfulness in the Western world, really responsible from taking this ancient contemplative practice into modern Western science and into a society where it was integrated in a secular way. So I was in the midst of delving into that world, looking to go on retreat with Jon Kabat-Zinn. And what do I find? Is a retreat with Dan Millman on an entire Way of the Peaceful Warrior weekend in New York. And ironically, I had one weekend available that summer that I would have been able to get away because I still had young kids at the time. The one weekend I was available was the weekend of this Dan Millman retreat.
Wow.
So you could imagine
Meant
how
to be.
many,
That's the
it
universe.
was. You could imagine how many stars felt aligned for me. I mean, literally, and I was in this place of cracking my heart open, literally asking the universe, all right, universe, show me the signs. And when I started a meditation practice, every morning I would sit in meditation, and I ended my meditation with 3 specific practices. One was a heart opener. The second was a loving kindness practice to offer myself the things that I didn't feel I possessed, like strength and confidence and courage and capability. But the heart opener was me asking the universe, thank you, universe, for bringing the people and experiences into my life that are helping me to be on my path. And when I opened up to that heart opening and asking the universe for signs, oh my goodness, did it deliver. So this was one of those manifestations. So here I go, flying out to New York, and we were at the Omega Institute in upstate New York. And it was really one of the first times I'd ever even traveled alone and done something. I mean, I'd gone to retreats at that point, but they were all more local. So even that felt like a really big deal for me. And this weekend was incredible. And the first part of the weekend was about developing a peaceful, compassionate heart. And then the Sunday morning was developing your warrior spirit. So what that looked like was Dan Millman, who at this point, he's in his 70s. This was in 2013 when I went on this retreat. So this was quite some time ago. And he used to be an Olympic trampolinist. He used to be a martial artist. He's the most amazing spiritual teacher I've ever come across. And so the developing the warrior spirit was him teaching us a martial arts exercise, like a martial arts routine. And it was all about how to be assertive and stand in your power, which assertive, power, those weren't things that I ever felt. I was a people pleaser. I was in favor of connection, even when it didn't feel right, because the thought of being alone was more intolerable than connection that felt disconnected. I mean, for any of you listening, to know what it feels like to be in a relationship where you feel more alone when you're with your partner than when you are actually alone, that's the space I was in. So developing this warrior spirit was very, very new for me as a practice or even a mindset. And he then puts on a Lionel Richie song, and I'm like, oh my God, like this out of body experience. How did I get to where I am? That it was a Sunday morning in upstate New York in the middle of July, and I'm doing martial arts with Dan Millman, listening to Lionel Richie. Like it was just hilarious in my mind. So then he sets up an exercise. We had to get into groups of 3. There was like maybe 65 people on this retreat. And let's say, we're in this little triad, and one person is the long lost friend who goes and stands across the room. And so let's say I'm seeing this long lost friend across the room, and the exercise was for me to go walk towards that person so that I could embrace this long lost friend. Well, person number 3 of our little triad, as I'm walking towards person number 2, person number 3 puts their arm out and blocks me from being able to reach the other person. That person number 3 was to represent self-doubt. And so we had to do this exercise a total of 9 times, in which 3 times where I'm trying to reach this other person and self-doubt blocks me from getting there. Then I go back to the starting point. I try to walk towards my friend, self-doubt interrupts me again. I go back to the starting point, and then the 3rd time I'm able to push past self-doubt and I get to my goal. And then we had to rotate, and then we had to rotate the roles. So we got to experience what it felt like to be the person not being able to get received because self-doubt was in the way. And then we also got to experience what it felt like as self-doubt blocking that person from trying to get to their goal. And that in and of itself was really powerful because self-doubt was a familiar friend of mine, constant voice in my head of, I can't do that. I don't know how to do that. That's not who I am. That's not the kind of person I could ever be. So even that in and of itself felt really awakening to realize, I could actually push past self-doubt and get to my goal. So then, and this is the real transformative, this was my most life-changing moment. Dan Millman then sets up 2 cement blocks with a purple meditation cushion in between and an interlocking plastic board that sat across the 2 blocks. And it was like a martial arts board that you could break. And he set this up, and he says, that our job, the next part of the exercise, was that we had to break a board. Well, the immediate thought that came into my head was, I can't break a board. Okay, well, there it was. Self-doubt was immediately present for me. He
Makes
then,
sense.
he assembles, the cylinder blocks, the purple meditation cushion in between, the board across the top of the blocks. And he actually tells us that we have only one chance to do this. But then to make it even, more interesting, he set it up 3 separate times. Like there were 3 different little stations, and there was the middle one, and that board was the weight of a real piece of wood that you would actually break in a martial arts exercise. To the left, the board was lighter, meaning it would be easier for you to break. To the right one was harder. And he said, okay, pick which one you want to do, get in line behind that. And then, we're going to go one at a time and everyone was going to cheer you on. But remember, you only have one chance to break the board. Well, there were people on this retreat ages 18 to probably 65 or 70. And here I am in the mid 30s, fairly in shape, but really believing I can't do this. So
So
I'm
which
not
one
someone
did you choose?
well, it's a great question. Thank you for asking. I'm not someone who likes to take the easy way out on anything, sometimes to my demise, making my life a little bit harder.
Yeah.
So I chose the middle one. I'm like, if I'm going to break the board, I'm going to do it with the one that's the weight of an equivalent real piece of wood. So it's now my turn. I get up there. I'm kneeling down in front of the board. I'm looking up at Dan Millman, and he's, guiding me on what to do. He tells us the part of our hand we're supposed to hit on it and, to take a deep breath. Well, the entire time, all I have going on in my head is, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do this. And as I'm kneeling there telling myself I can't do this, I'm focusing on that board. Everyone's chanting my name. I raise my arm up. I come down to hit the board, and I didn't break it.
Hmm.
And I was devastated. And I'm like, see, there it is. Told myself I couldn't do it, and I couldn't. I guess I was right. I felt shame. I felt embarrassment, but I also was like confirmation of, okay, I guess I'm just not meant to be able to do this.
Hmm. Well, not
Other,
everyone's born
yeah,
a kung fu master,
yeah,
but
exactly. So
I could definitely see where that would be a little challenging, or maybe like you said, you're questioning yourself. And I guess I would probably do the same. So what happened after that?
after everyone went, Dan Millman then said, raise your hand if you didn't break the board. And only about 6 people out of about 65 raised their hands. So he said, okay, I'm going to give you one more chance. And then it was my turn again. And I was now even more nervous than I was the first time because I'd already confirmed what I thought was possible. And he said, okay, so which board are you going to choose? So I had that question again. Am I going to do the one that I started with? Or am I going to go for the lighter one and give me a greater possibility at success? So which one do you guys think I picked?
I don't know. I'm kind of okay. The hard.
I did the same one that I started. I did not go for the easier board. I'm like, "Yeah, but there's no easy model. Like
You're going to conquer this.
I was at this point now both equally taken over by self-doubt, but then like equally determined to push past it. So I get up again. It's now my turn. I'm kneeling down once again. I'm looking up at Dan Millman. I realized I did 2 things wrong the first time. First one was I hit the wrong part of my hand. I hit with my pinky, and I knew that because the tip of my finger had now turned purple. I did not hit with the
Ugh.
meaty part of the side of my hand. It was a mindset shift. And it wasn't simply telling myself, oh, I could do this. That would be the obvious answer of the mindset shift from I can't to I can. What it shifted to was my gaze. The first time, my entire gaze was on the board.
Mm.
What I realized and what Dan Millman had described that I may have failed to mention the first time in describing the setup, he said, the board represents your obstacles and the purple cushion underneath represents your dreams and your goals. And I realized that the first time I went up there, my entire energy, focus, and attention was on the board, meaning all I saw was the obstacle in front of me. And when I fully realized that that was my biggest downfall the first time around, something inside of me came over. I took a deep breath And my entire energy, focus, and gaze shifted from the board to that cushion. And I raised my hand up, I took a deep breath, and I broke through that board and I hit that purple cushion, and my arms like went up in the air and I let out this huge yell. And that single moment was the defining change for me to say, no longer is self-doubt an excuse that I can hold on to say that's just my excuse. And from that moment, I'm like, oh shit, I got to get divorced. And I realized I had to shift my entire energy, focus, and gaze from what I was afraid of to what I really wanted.
Mm. Wow, so
And
powerful. I love
it
that.
was, thank you. And so part of the things that I've used in my teachings with clients over the years is to ask the question after they know this story, what's your board and what's your cushion?
Mm.
And I think it's a really beautiful metaphor for where are your obstacles and what are your goals? And for many women I work with, oftentimes their board, no, oftentimes their board is not knowing what their cushion is. They're stuck at not even knowing where they want to go, right? So then we don't even move forward at all. And so part of, I think, this practice is identifying to get unstuck. It's not just about getting unstuck of what's not working. It's to get clarity and to create vision of what am I wanting to bring into my life? Because if I can focus on that, then the obstacles to get there become a little bit smaller. But the other second mindset shift that I adopted was recognizing that my old story of that the future was scary, the unknown was fearful, and I was avoiding uncertainty at all costs and thinking, well, if I'm in the known, then I must be happy. But I realized, but wait a second, I have all the known and I'm unfulfilled. So by default, my happiness and fulfillment must lie in the unknown. And rather than being afraid of it, I realized I got to create that. And that became momentum for me and energizing. And it gave me the impetus to trust I can face whatever is coming at me, because it was that simple mindset shift of focusing on the obstacle versus focusing on my goal, quieting down my inner critic, shifting out of the narrative of the future is scary versus the future is awesome because I get to be in control of it, versus what I had been doing my majority of my life up till that point was just being afraid and playing and living really small. And that was in July of 2013, and I was divorced a year later. And a year and a half after that, I had just met the love of my life and was on a plane to Costa Rica for a 7-day retreat with Dan Millman. And
Oh
I
my
was like,
gosh.
wow, in 2.5 years, I broke that board and I actualized all the change. Because how many people might have broken that board and gone back home, back to their everyday life and was like, oh, that was a really cool experience, but I couldn't implement it. And within 2.5 years, I was on a plane internationally flying somewhere alone, which was a big deal, and broke through that board again on that second retreat. And yeah, it's been an ongoing journey ever since.
Wow. It's so empowering just to hear you share your story and all of the amazing achievements that you've made and how far you've come personally and professionally, and just the importance of the mindset shift. I feel like that's something that so many people can relate to, and it can benefit people who are struggling with all kinds of different issues or fears. I just think that's something that it's universally, it can help people
Yeah.
from all walks of life. And I really, really appreciate you sharing the specifics and going into such depth about all the things that you've gone through, and even some of the intergenerational story, that started before
Yes.
you as well, and all the fear that comes from that, and kind of shifting away from this like fear mindset. And I love, love, love all the work that you're doing and all of the incredible support that you're providing to countless women and couples right now. I know
Thank
you have
you.
a number. Yeah, of course. Oh my gosh. Thank you for being here and for sharing. I want to make sure people know where to find you. We will put all of this in our show notes as well. I know you have several websites. You have a lot of things going on. You have books, you have a podcast, another one, retreats.
I
So yeah,
do.
share with listeners briefly where to find you, and I will also put it in show notes for anyone listening. If you want to click, it'll be really easy to find.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you for all that. So yeah, I've been in service ever since, trying to help guide others to create the change that they're seeking and have the courage to do so. So I have a lot of different offerings to make that happen. I can, the best place to find me is my website, joreerose.com. And I've got self-guided courses on introduction to mindfulness and meditation. I wrote a book that came out in 2021 on gratitude, and I've got a recording of gratitude meditations from that book you can find there. But what I'm really excited about right now is two major things. Is one, after a year hiatus, I am relaunching my podcast, Journey Forward with Joree Rose, which just got relaunched on April 3rd. But my vision for this is different. It's really I am creating community with the listeners, because podcasts can be really inspiring. And then once someone's done listening, they're like, wait, so what was that tool that I could implement? How can I do that? And so I'm creating a community that's going from passive learning to more, or passive listening to more active learning and engagement and resources and tools. And it's very, very reasonably priced, but it's really with the intention to take what I'm talking about on the podcast and actualize it into actionable steps and handouts and resources and practices and tools to support your journey in whatever that looks like. So that's the Journey Forward with Joree Rose podcast community and the podcast relaunch. And then my partner, my fiance, who's a psychologist, and we do amazing couples work together. And we have a relationship podcast called Love Isn't Enough. And we also do relationship coaching in a very unique way. He works individually with the man, I work individually with the woman, and then we come together, the four of us, in couples work. And that was born out of our relationship challenges that 7 years in, we went through a short but very painful breakup that woke us up to recognizing what are some of the barriers that couples have in deepening their connection. And here's a little secret. It's not about your partner. It's your own unresolved work that's preventing you from leaning into safety, trust, and vulnerability from attachment wounds and stress. And we did that really, really deep work and now have a relationship that I dreamt of, but didn't even know it was quite this possible. And that's what we're here to guide couples in.
Oh, that's wonderful. We so appreciate that. We so appreciate all the tools that you're sharing, the personal journeys that you're sharing, different options you offer, whether it's couples or individual or mindfulness. And we're so grateful for you. I think we all have like little girl crushes on you. And I think that you are going to touch so many other lives. I could just feel it in my heart with your story. And I'm so proud of you, and I'm sure your partner is as well. And I'm so excited that we get to share your story with others. So thank you.
I have that big smile again that I did in the beginning.
Oh,
thank you guys
starting
so
and
much.
ending with a smile. It's a smile sandwich.
Yes.
Thank you so much again, Joree. This has been awesome.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
To all of our listeners, thank you for joining us on this episode of Transforming and Thriving. We'll be back every other Monday with more inspiring stories. Please follow us on your favorite podcast app and follow us on Instagram so you can be a part of this community and stay up to date with each episode. Feel free to leave a review so that we can get your valuable feedback and other people can find these powerful stories. We're all in this crazy life together, so let's move through it together. See you there.